guys. Okay, so I am back. This is the first podcast episode I'm doing since 2021 as like a lone person. I did a little series where I interviewed some really amazing people in the education and the care sector. But this is the first time I'm coming back as just me. And the plan is to release a series of podcast episodes. And in them, I'm going to be talking about so much, everything that I speak about in my conferences, on my talks. I've just released a book, so my first ever book, which is here for those of you who are watching on YouTube. It's called The Therapeutic School Approach, and I've literally poured my whole heart and soul into this book. Basically everything I've ever taught or talked about and my whole kind of approach, like the therapeutic teaching stuff and the therapeutic classroom stuff, is all in this book. And I'm so proud of it because it took a really, really long time for me to write it. At the time, my mum was so unwell. She really struggled with dementia and ended up getting sort of psychosis. So I was her carer and I was trying to juggle work and write the book, and I'd only given myself 6 months to write it initially. And it took a lot longer than that. So it is something that I feel like I have poured my heart into, even though it was at one of the trickiest times of my life. So I'm going to be talking about lots of things in this book and exploring them and unpicking them. And I really feel like it's time to kind of catch up because it's been a long time since I released the last podcast episode, and I have done and learned and experienced so much and have slightly tweaked my view on things, as you do, as you evolve and as you grow, and kind of expanded my view on things as well. So I really want this podcast to be somewhere that you can come if you found me on the internet or on a website or maybe an article or something that you've read and it's kind of led you to this podcast. I'm hoping that there are things in this podcast that you can listen to, whether that's on your commute or your dog walk or wherever you like to listen to your podcasts, in the kitchen washing up and cooking, which is where I like to listen to mine. And I hope that there's so much value here for you that you can kind of listen to one of these episodes and go, oh my God, like I can do that tomorrow with the children I work with, and to really get you thinking in a different way about education and about teaching. One of the things I do really, really well is challenge the norm. And I'm not afraid to do that because I feel like there's so much that we're doing in education and with children in general that doesn't work, but we're doing it because we've always done it. And there has to be a point where people start to say, this isn't working, like this isn't in the best interest of the children. Why are we doing it? And for some reason, I am one of those people. So you may listen to things on this podcast and go, oh God, I've not heard about that before, or oh, don't know how I feel about that. And that's totally fine. So today we're going to talk about trauma-informed practice because I hear a lot of people talking about trauma-informed practice. And some people have completely nailed it. And I feel like, yes, absolutely, that's trauma-informed practice. Some people have a massive misconception about what it is. And there is a train of thought around trauma-informed meaning airy-fairy, that we sort of give children an excuse because they've had difficult experiences in their life. So we go, oh, well, we're going to like wrap this child up in cotton wool and there's not going to be any boundaries and we're just going to talk about feelings all day. And that isn't trauma-informed. And it often isn't how people are practicing trauma-informed approaches. But I can understand that for some, maybe there have been experiences where somebody maybe hasn't quite managed to get to the point yet where they're looking at like boundaries that are trauma-informed, and they are just trying to embed the understanding that we've got to be more aware of children's experiences and trying to be reflective and kind of support the child. But that, again, isn't necessarily a complete picture of what trauma-informed practice is. So I would like to have a chat with you today about what is trauma-informed practice. And then in future episodes, we're going to look at all sorts of things. So we're going to look at my therapeutic classrooms approach. That's the next one I'm going to record, and I'm super excited about that because, my God, there's some stories to tell you. And it's been a journey. And hopefully, again, there's going to be loads of things in that you can learn from and can be excited about. And then, what else? Therapeutic school. And then also, I keep looking to the side. If you're watching me on YouTube or online, this is me thinking, I think in this direction. I'm also going to be looking at things like our behaviour management policies, what needs to change when we look at behaviour management policies, behaviour in general, and the way that we kind of approach behaviour in school and what we can do to sort of, again, make that more trauma informed. But there's loads and loads of amazing things that I want to talk to you about. So that's all coming. Okay, so why am I choosing to talk about trauma informed practice today? So the other day I was sending out, I'm doing like a book tour. So I was sending out emails about this online kind of book tour that I'm doing, and my team was sending emails out as well. And I was getting loads of really positive responses, and for some crazy reason, I genuinely just thought that it would be really good. It's now, when I'm recording this, it was the end of April when I started. And I thought it'd be so good if I could get some bookings up until July and kind of do some free sessions for schools where I talk about the book and I talk about like the approach of therapeutic schools and kind of just do something to celebrate the fact that I've written this book. And I swear I'm literally booked up till February. It's amazing. So I'm doing Tuesdays, most Tuesdays, and kind of doing this run where I'm just offering like a free session as a twilight session to schools. So I'd emailed out about it, and so did the team. And the team got back this email that said, not in a million years. Like, I'm working with a school who's done this approach, and the school's in like disarray or something along those lines. Now, I'm not sure whether this person was talking about my approach. I don't know that they were. I've never received feedback that has said that it's made the school go into disarray. And again, in which case I want to understand more about what is it that maybe hasn't worked, or how has it been interpreted? Can I help? It didn't come back to me, but it really got me thinking. And I was thinking, well, if it was just a general sort of trauma-informed practice that the school had tried to implement, why is the school in disarray? What's going on? There has to be more to the story, and obviously there will be. There's going to be things going on there that isn't in 2 lines of an email. But I think we do need to consider that trauma-informed practice does have a bad rep. And even just getting an email for this particular head teacher who's obviously trying to support this school and is trying to undo some of the maybe things that are not working, for him, he just wants to do the very best for the school. And maybe, and I don't know, but maybe the word trauma-informed has now got connotations for him of a school that maybe doesn't have boundaries, or a school that maybe is a bit airy-fairy, or a school that's lost their sort of, air quotes, control of the children, things like that. So it got me thinking. And I think really what we need to do is to look at, well, what is trauma-informed? So when I talk about trauma-informed practice, for me, it's really understanding like what trauma does to our children, okay? Because when we think about trauma-informed, it literally does what it says on the tin. We're more informed about trauma, right? And then we use what we know about trauma to inform how we then react, support, teach, respond to the children that we're working with or the children around us. And the truth is, on some level, a lot of us have been through something that is considered trauma. So if we go right the way back to what trauma is, trauma can be anything that is emotionally distressing for us, okay? So things that are obvious, like abuse or neglect or domestic violence or losing someone. But it can also be things like, I think, living in a really big family. So like, I've met so many kids who live in a huge family. They've got X amount of brothers. They're the middle one. Mum's just the younger one. Mum's just had a new baby. So now they're like not the younger one anymore. And they get lost. They don't know their place. They're maybe often not seen or heard in the same way that they would need or want to be. They're kind of without the intention. This family might be very loving and nurturing, but it's difficult to share your affection between 6 to 7 children, and a lot of the families that I've met in this circumstance, they are struggling. A lot of these families have really low incomes. They are living in areas that maybe don't have as many opportunities as you would hope for them to have. Often mum is struggling with the partner that she's with, or many partners that she's been with, and the children are experiencing this along the way. And that's hard. That's really, really hard. But even if you're just in a really big family and you don't quite know where you fit in and you don't quite feel heard or listened to, that for me comes under the umbrella of trauma. Now, trauma is obviously something that's deeply distressing. It's something that really impacts us and is really difficult to navigate and really challenging to navigate. And that often happens for a prolonged period of time when we're looking at trauma-informed practice, like abuse and neglect. But living in a family like that is also something that happens to you over the whole of your childhood, and it is and can be emotionally difficult to navigate. It's not abuse, but it's still hard. So I always bring those things in when I'm looking at trauma, because we have to consider them. You know, if you've got a child who is in a family, they don't feel seen or heard, it's a really big family, they struggle to get the sort of attention, and I say that word very lightly because I hate the word attention seeking. No child is seeking attention. They need connection. They're seeking connection and validation and love. They're not seeking attention, you know, just for attention's sake. But when they do struggle in their family to get that attention, that's going to spill out into the way they behave in school, right? It's going to spill out into the fact that, you know, when you're teaching a whole class and they're not picked when they put their hand up, it's going to reinforce that belief that they're not valuable or they're not seen. Or if their work isn't chosen to go on the board, or if there's a massive group of kids and everyone's like running outside speaking to the lunchtime organizer, and this particular child would really, really like to get their word in, but they just kind of cower back a little bit because what's the point? I'm never really heard, so I'm just going to stand and listen. Or I'm going to do something really out there that's going to get your attention because then I can be seen. So we've got to think about these lower level things as well, all right? So in a big family, moving house lots of times, you know, low income, of course, is one of them, all of these different things. And I think once we're aware that that's what trauma in its broad sense looks like, we then have to think about what makes it traumatic. And actually that's looking at how does it make us feel? You know, if you're in a family where you don't feel safe, if you've grown up and you are a child who maybe, let's say, mum and dad are domestically violent, and there's always arguments and it's always loud and it's always chaotic and it doesn't feel safe in your own home, and it hasn't since you were born, you're going to start to believe that the world isn't a safe place. You're going to start to believe that you have to protect yourself in order to stay safe. And that's going to be your main driving force. So for people who've been through prolonged trauma, your brain literally adapts itself to survive. You're constantly in a state of survival. You're going, okay, if I go home tonight, is there going to be food on the table? Am I going to be warm? Am I going to need to look after my brothers and sisters because mum's going to be drunk? Am I going to need to keep myself really quiet and go and look after myself and do what I need to do so I don't frustrate mum and dad because I don't want to get into trouble, or because I don't want to get told off, you know, because that's going to then lead to like emotional abuse, or it might lead to really harsh punishments or whatever the scenario is. So what happens is that in our brains then, and all our brains are designed to keep us safe. So we all have something that I call our emotional survival part of our brain. And that part of our brain helps us to stay safe in those moments. So if we're constantly in those moments, that part of our brain is constantly on. And you'll have heard me talk about this in previous episodes, and I'll probably talk about it in lots and lots of other episodes because it's so important. And I feel like we don't talk about it enough. It's one of the most undervalued pieces of science that is out there. And I think if everybody knew and understood it to the point where it was like ingrained in their soul, they would see children so much differently. They would also see adults differently as well, and potentially themselves. But very, very quickly, when you've been in a situation that's scary or threatening or emotionally difficult in any way, your emotional survival part of the brain reacts first. So that's the part of the brain that goes, okay, this doesn't feel safe. This doesn't feel like something that's going to be good for me. I have to do something in order to protect myself, because otherwise I'm going to die, or I'm going to be hurt, or I'm going to be harmed. And if we think about ourselves as creatures that need to survive, like animals in the wild would, and we did at one point have to figure out how to survive, you know, our brains are made up in exactly the same way. So our brain is going to go, well, what can I do then? Because I'm going to be hurt, or I'm going to be at risk of death if I don't do something. So our beautiful, wonderful brains are programmed to step in quickly and to trigger us to react in a certain way that is often out of our control, that is then going to help us be safe. So we might find ourselves going into fight, flight, or freeze. So again, you guys will know, hopefully, that fight, flight, freeze is a survival response, and we all do it. So you might fight back, you might get angry, you might get aggressive. Our children might, you know, stand in front of their parents to stop them if they are being domestically violent. You know, I've heard lots of children and work with lots of children that do that. It might be that they are shouting and getting in the face of someone and trying to protect someone else, or even themselves. It might be that they're so overwhelmed by all of their feelings that they are physically aggressive and, don't know what else to do other than to fight or to shout or to swear or to argue or to slam things. And then we have our flight mode, so where things are so overwhelming that we need to get away. So children will run off, they'll go and hide. In school, they might hide under the tables or run off over a fence or a tree or try and get away, which a lot of our children are doing in education. I can't even tell you. There are so many children now who are literally in flight mode on a daily basis. They don't want to go to school. They refuse to go into the classroom. They run out of the classroom. They are literally running up trees. They're running and climbing, jumping over fences and trying to get away from the school, running round and round. That's flight mode, that's a survival response. And then we have other forms of flight mode, like going to the toilet loads in a lesson, or needing to go and ask for a drink all the time, or just distracting everyone. Like if I'm constantly going to distract other people, then I can get away from the thing that's difficult for me, like maybe the work is tricky, or I'm worried I'm going to get told that I've done it wrong, so therefore I'm going to do this because it's going to help me survive in this tricky situation. And again, that is the brain's default setting to help us to do that. It's not like a cognitive choice. And then we have freeze, where our children just don't know what to do, or where we don't know what to do and we just shut down. So I can go on about fight, flight, freeze for ages, and I can hear myself starting to go down that route, and there's so much I could say about it. So maybe I'll do another podcast episode specifically on that. I probably have already done one in the past, but I'm going to do a full refresh one so that you can understand the science. But for the purpose of today, in terms of understanding how our brains respond, I think the key message is knowing that whenever we feel threatened in any way, so maybe that is through abuse or neglect or violence, but maybe that's also because the lesson's really hard, or because someone's challenging me to do something I don't know how to do, or because there's been a big change and I'm not comfortable with that big change, like maybe the PE teacher is different, or the school hall is really noisy. Those things are then going to affect the children because it reminds them of a time where things were really tricky. So for example, if you're a child who has been through, maybe your family just argues a lot and it's always loud and it's always kind of full of conflict, and it feels stressful and it feels overwhelming and it feels unsafe, and this happens on a regular basis, and you're constantly in the middle of that, or even part of it, but it's still making you feel really stressed, it's still increasing your stress hormones, still makes you feel really unsafe. Your brain, your survival, emotional part of the brain is going to respond, right? So you're going to be figuring out ways to stay safe. Maybe you're going to realize the best thing for me to do is to just go to my room and close the door. Or maybe you're going to think, well, actually, I'm better off getting in the middle of this and fighting. And then fast forward to school. That child's in school and the dinner hall is noisy and it's loud and it's chaotic and it's overwhelming and it doesn't feel safe and you don't have any control. And your brain doesn't recognize that this is a lunch hall. Your brain goes, well, I know all those feelings. We've had all those feelings. And when we had them, we were in danger. So I'm going to get you out of this danger because that's what I do as your brain. And I am going to get us to be safe. And we're going to go into flight mode and we're not going to go in the dinner hall because that is the safest thing to do. And your brain will assess it and will say, this is obviously a difficult and unsafe situation and I'm going to keep you safe and we're not going to go in. So you'll see a child then refuse to go in. They'll sit on the floor. They'll do anything they can to cause a situation where they don't then go into the dinner hall. So maybe they disrupt the lesson just before dinner and get sent to the head teacher to eat with them. Or maybe they run out of the dinner hall and spend the whole of break time in a distressed state with teachers trying to figure out how to calm them down, and they get to eat their lunch later on when no one's in the hall. All of those sorts of things start to happen. And that's the case with children who've been through any sort of trauma. So it affects how we then show up in the world. What we experience teaches us lessons, and that's how then we show up, right? So, for example, I grew up in a family where my dad was an alcoholic and he was extremely depressed and he had manic depression. So he would be up and down. One day he would be amazing, normal, charismatic, wonderful human that he was. And the next day he would be extremely scary. He would purse his lips. He would look straight through at us. He'd have a completely different face, if that makes sense. And he was really unpredictable and extremely emotionally abusive and really scary to be around. And you were constantly trying to predict his every move, right? So I grew up trying to always be one step ahead of everyone. What are they going to do? What are they going to say? How are they thinking? How are they feeling? How can I manage that feeling and emotion for them so that I then am okay? And that emotion isn't going to get so overwhelming that then it comes onto me and I then am in an unsafe situation. How do I make sure that this person is getting their needs met? Because I have to meet their needs first, because that is going to keep me safe. And I still do that now. But my brain has learned to do that because that is my survival sort of stress response, to go, okay, well, this has been the situation where you've been really unsafe. When someone is overwhelmed, or when someone is, anyone is just with you, your job is to make sure that you're managing their emotional state. You're the person who can help them feel better. You're the person who puts their needs first. And I do that all the time now, because that's just part of what I've learned from my trauma. And I'm aware of it, but it's definitely something that takes control. And sometimes I have to be like, hang on, I'm not responsible for this person's reactions. I can't make this person, I can't manage the situation for this person. But somewhere deep inside, I believe that I should. And if I can't, I really find that difficult. And so our trauma kind of informs how we then show up. It informs how we behave. And that's happening every day for our kids in the classroom. They're constantly working from a place of survival. You're going to have children constantly asking for a drink or to get out the lesson, or that they're distracting their friends as a means to be in flight mode, or that they're angry or frustrated or whatever. And they happen all day, every day, don't they? You literally can see this playing out every day. So when we look at trauma-informed practice, the idea is that we understand how trauma then impacts our children's brain and responses. So one of the big things, and again, I'll probably do a full session on this, but one of the big things that I think we need to be aware of is that when we're being sort of hijacked by our emotional survival part of the brain, and we're going into those fight, flight, freeze responses, we can't access our higher level rational thinking part of the brain, because that part of the brain doesn't really help us in the moment, right? Our rational thinking part of the brain, that's what they call the prefrontal cortex, but I tend to stay away from jargony words because I just don't know that they help us. But it's sort of the part of the brain that's in charge of all of our critical thinking. So problem solving, reasoning, reflection, having empathy for others. Our memory, being able to remember things and recall things, happens in that part of our brain. Problem solving and navigating challenging situations and controlling our emotions. All of that happens in that rational thinking part of our brain. But that rational thinking part of our brain can't come on at the same time as our emotional survival brain, because it doesn't make sense for us to do that. If we were in a situation where, I don't know, let's say there was a car coming towards you, your first response has to be to go into survival mode and run away, because flight mode is going to help you stay safe. If your rational thinking brain comes on and you start to try and understand the situation and reflect on it, and that's going to slow you down and it's going to make you more at risk. So that part of the brain just doesn't come on. And this is a massive problem in education for our children and in just parenting in general, because then when we see a child in dysregulation, so a child who is dysregulated, they're not regulated, they're not calm, they're not able to manage their own emotions and their behaviours, and they're kind of look, to want of a better word, out of control of their own, emotional responses and reactions and behaviour, that is a sign that child is in that survival part of their brain. They're not in that functional, rational part of their brain. And so they actually don't know how to deal with the situation in the moment. And they can't problem solve or reason or reflect or use their memory or control their emotions. All of those skills are not there. So when we look at trauma-informed practice, then we need to think, okay, so I understand that trauma impacts our children's thoughts, feelings, belief system, and their brain. I understand they're in that survival emotional response state, so they can't really control their responses, and a lot of what they're doing is about trying to stay safe. And I understand that's going to affect their behaviour. So when I'm then seeing a child come in and flip over tables, I have to start to understand that isn't actually a choice. That isn't actually a cognitive decision that's been made from a rational part of that child's brain. It's actually a child who's so dysregulated and so overwhelmed with their feelings or thoughts that this is their only form of response, and it's probably fight mode. They're probably so unsure what to do. The only thing they can do is fight back in that moment. So they're flipping tables and they're really angry and out of control. And so then you start to read the situation differently and you go, okay, so this isn't a child misbehaving. This is a child who's really struggling. And this is probably a trauma response. It's probably a response that links to their emotional survival brain. And then how you handle that is different. And that is a trauma-informed response, right? How you handle that situation. I think the other thing to sort of note and say here is that if you've been through those experiences in your life where things are chaotic and unsafe, or you are at risk of the adults around you and the people around you, it's going to change how you see the world and other people. So you're not necessarily going to have the same responses as a child who feels really secure and really safe, and their parents guide them through their emotions and make sure there's lots of cuddles and love and explanations, and they get really good sleep and they go to bed on time and they're fed really well, and that's a completely different kettle of fish. When you're a child who's literally just fighting to survive, and you're knackered and you don't know where your next meal might come from, or you've been able to stay up all night playing like a killing game until 1 a.m, or mum and dad are constantly shouting and screaming or putting you down, or whatever the scenario is, and there's loads of scenarios, that's going to change how you think. You're going to have a completely different belief system. Your belief system is probably going to be, I'm not good enough, I'm unlovable, I can't do things very well, I'm bad, I'm always in trouble, I am unworthy of people's affection or love. What even is love? Do you know what I mean? And you're going to start to have all of these beliefs. That's very different to a child who goes, I'm lovable, I'm cared for, people will support me, and when I'm struggling, I am an amazing person, I can contribute so much to the world, I have good ideas, I have good thoughts, all of the things that come from children who have been given those belief systems because of their experiences. It's so different when you've been through trauma. Genuinely, even as an adult, sometimes I can't understand why I think and feel something so differently to somebody else, and why it's so natural for them to just be that way. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't have that, and therefore don't know what that is. So for example, a few years ago, went to a friend's caravan. So I've got a friend, her mum has a caravan, and she, like a lovely caravan looking over the beach, it's beautiful. And her mum said, you and your friends can come, chill out, have a weekend, you've all got kids, take some time out, go and have some time in the caravan. So we all went away, had this gorgeous weekend, stayed up all night chatting, went on the beach for walks. It was gorgeous. But at the end of this trip, the mum comes back and has, 45 minutes with us. And we all sit down at this table, and her stepdad is also there. And they just sit with us and they start asking questions about our life. And they talk about how it's really difficult when you're a parent and you've got all of these things to juggle, and it's tiring. So of course you can have this weekend and come here, you just need that love. But the way they were interacting with my friend, I don't see. I don't experience. I've never experienced that sort of interaction. So this mum was talking to her about her feelings, giving her cuddles. She was dead nurturing. She was giving her eye contact. She was genuinely concerned and bothered about her child. Her stepdad went and got food and drinks and was like, do you want anything? Do you need anything? I've done this for you if you want it. And I was just sat there oh my God, this is what parents should be like. I don't have this experience. Now, I unfortunately don't have either of my parents now. And after a long, very traumatic experience of life, it's kind of come to a head, and my mum is now in a care home. She's 58. She's got dementia and psychosis, so she has full-on delusions. She really doesn't understand or really know much about where she is, or even what's going on in her life. So she's effectively gone. And my dad died just before my university exams as a result of his alcoholism and trauma that he went through. And again, maybe I'll discuss it in an episode to come. So I don't actually have them around now. But when I did have them around, I was doing that for them. I never had that experience. So anyway, we finished this, and it was very basic stuff. That's just normal. Do you know what I mean? I just don't have that normal. We got in the car and I just burst out crying. I burst out crying, and I was hyperventilating. And I was you're so lucky to have parents who care. You're so lucky to have. And she was she couldn't quite understand what I was talking about, because it was so small of a detail. She looks at you. Your mum looks at you. Really little details. So when you've been through trauma, you don't really realise that a lot of your behaviours and responses, or even just beliefs, are so different from other people's, because you've just experienced the world differently. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, there's all sorts of stories I could tell you. I'm not going to go into it now because this will be a 10-hour episode. But hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight into like the minute things that go on when you've been through trauma that affect how you show up in the world and how you believe about things that you believe about yourself and things that you believe about other people. And you kind of like, those belief systems are built up from experience. So you just assume that's the way the world will be outside of those experiences because your brain is developing while you're going through them. So your brain is literally creating brain pathways that go, okay, so when this happens, then this happens. Or when someone does this, this is going to happen. Or, okay, this is a roadmap for life. Like, when I'm struggling or when I'm emotional or when I'm overwhelmed, people don't help me. Like, I've got to figure it out for myself. If you experience that for the first 11, 12 years of your life, or even just 1 year of your life, your brain is programming itself to go, okay, so this is reality. Do you know what I mean? So then when we fast forward into school and we go, okay, we're going to be more trauma informed. Well, when we say trauma informed, that's what we mean. We mean that we've understood trauma enough to understand what's going on in the brain, how it affects children's perception and mindset and belief system about themselves and those values we talked about, like I'm not good enough, I can't do this. The perception of what other people will do and how other people will show up. So Mrs. walked away from my table, she's abandoned me. Like, she doesn't care about me anymore, she's meant not come back. Like, that might seem really crazy. She's just gone over to the other table. But actually, for a child who's been abandoned over and over and over again, it's just another experience of potential abandonment that the body goes, oh God, we know this feeling when somebody leaves us, they don't come back. So their brain and their body is then responding. So it's understanding all of those things and then changing your practice, because how we then respond to those children needs to be different. Now, for me, when we look at trauma-informed practice and when we look at kind of mental health and well-being in general, I don't necessarily subscribe to the belief system that we have to treat everybody differently because they have different needs. And I say that lightly because I understand, like, when we've got SEN needs or autism and things like that, there are going to be different things we have to tweak and change, of course, because we have to understand that maybe the way they process something will be very different, or that their experience of something is going to be very different. And that is the case of someone who's been through trauma. But there are so many of us that have been through difficulties in our lives, and you're not always going to know all the children in your classroom that have been through difficulties. You know, they say, I don't even know what the statistic is now, but it's something like 1 in 5 or something like that. Basically, like, a lot of children in the classroom, not showing my credibility very well here, but there's a lot of children within any one classroom that have been through something that is traumatic or difficult and that is considered like a trauma. And so for me, I don't think we're at the point now where we can go, okay, well, just Jack is dealing with trauma, so we're going to, approach Jack differently. I think it needs to be a trauma-informed approach across the whole board, because we've all been through challenges that affect us. We've all had some sort of thing that's happened to us. We've all been through COVID, for example. That was traumatic. That impacted how we thought and we felt. A lot of us were working from our survival brain when we were in that state. So we can assume all children have had some level of trauma. So how we respond to our children is key. We also have to understand that what I talked about in terms of the brain there and how we all go into that emotional survival state when we're challenged, well, that's just child development as well. We do that more when we've been through trauma, but we all do that. So any child, if they feel overwhelmed by something, their emotional survival response is going to kick in. That's part of child development. When you're feeling like a bit overwhelmed because, I don't know, maybe the day's been really, really different and your friends haven't been treating you very nicely and you're just feeling just a bit tired and everything feels overwhelming, you're going to be working from your emotional survival part of the brain, no matter how wonderful and loving and secure your family dynamic is at home, because that's just part of life. So we actually need to look at trauma-informed responses, but look at it as a whole school approach or a whole approach to every child, because the way we then tweak our responses actually supports every child, because we're looking at the neuroscience and we're working with the brain. And we'll talk about this more when we look at like our behaviour management session. And I say management, I don't actually believe we can manage anyone's behaviour, but we'll talk about that more in a future episode. But what I think we need to be looking at is, okay, so what do we do to help support these children from a trauma-informed kind of perspective? And I think part of that is really looking at understanding that it's not an airy-fairy thing. Because I think sometimes we can go, okay, well, if we're trauma-informed, we don't tell children off, or we don't have boundaries. And that's not true. One of the things we need to look at is understanding that when we tell a child off and we punish them in a moment where they're in an emotionally challenging state and they're so overwhelmed or they don't feel safe and they're working from that emotional survival brain, and then in that moment we tell them off and we give them a consequence, we're not actually helping. We're probably going to make it worse. Because first of all, they're not in that rational thinking part of their brain, so they're not even going to be able to learn from the situation or manage it in the right way. And they're also probably going to feel more attacked by us, right? So for example, if a child comes in and kicks over a chair and they've had a rubbish morning and mum has been really, really frustrated and angry with this child on the way to school, dad was drunk all night, the child hasn't had breakfast, they were in a state of flight mode, so they just played zombie games all night, and they've come into school and the teacher goes, "Why are you late? You need to sit down, we've got English now." And the child goes, "But it's PE. It's PE on a Monday morning." And the teacher goes, "No, we're going to do some English because we didn't manage to get through it yesterday," or whatever the scenario is. And the child goes, "I'm not doing English," and kicks over a chair. If we then fail to recognise that this child's probably working from that survival state and something is going on, they must feel extremely overwhelmed to not be able to handle that situation, a very simple situation, in a healthy way. There's something else there that's driving that factor of them feeling so angry already, right? And if we fail to notice that and we just go, "Jack's misbehaving again, he's kicked over a chair. Right, Jack, I'm going to count to 3, and then you either need to go and sit on the thinking step, or you're going to be on a yellow card, or I'm going to give you one warning, or that's a behaviour point," or whatever our behaviour system is. We are not trauma-informed because we're not approaching the child through helping and guiding them through what's going on in the moment and acknowledging they need some support. We're going, this child's made a cognitive choice to kick over a chair and therefore should be punished. So what we might say is, right, you're not going out to break. Well, that's just an arbitrary punishment that doesn't really mean anything. When we're being trauma-informed, we don't want to give just punishments for punishment's sake. We want to help the child in the moment, but we also want to make sure that that child can learn from the situation and that we're being sensitive to their needs in that situation. So we might not necessarily say, "Well, you're not having break," because that is just a punishment. They're not going to learn anything from not having break, other than the fact that you haven't been able to help regulate them and support them, and now you're just punishing them and rejecting them and telling them off. But actually, if we then meet that child where they are, we help them to regulate, we calm them down, we get them some breakfast, we understand something else is going on here and this child's in that survival state. We get them out of that survival state, and then we say, "Can you go and pick up the chair that you dropped?" And the child goes and gets the chair. That's still a consequence. Maybe they have to do something else. Maybe you might say, "Okay, we've missed a bit of English. Let's do a little bit of English, and then you can go and have some time outside," or whatever. But it has to be something that links to the situation, and it has to be something that teaches the child responsibility for the situation. And that's the difference for me between trauma-informed practice, where we're looking at how do we help support the child in the moment, but we're just going to talk about his feelings all day and take him to a calm room and then have no consequence for the fact that he threw over the chair. Because of course then we're going to get schools that are struggling to, again, quote unquote manage, because we don't manage children's behaviour, but in order to for a school to feel like they're able to support children's behaviour. And it's hard, you've got lots of children in a school all day, every day, going through all these developmental milestones, and all of them are going to be responding with some sort of survival instinct at some point in the school day, whether you see that or not, with their friend, or like this Jack, with the chair. And that's tricky. So we have to have some boundaries. We have to have that kind of overarching system where we can say, well, if you're going to throw over a chair, this is what's going to happen. But it can't just be a random punishment. It has to be linked to the situation so the child learns from it. And that is where trauma-informed practice needs to sort of go. So I have waffled for a long time, so I'm going to give you some quick tips, and we'll talk about behaviour and we'll talk about behaviour management in a different episode. So for me, when we then look at trauma-informed practice, what does it mean? So it means that we recognise trauma and how it impacts our child's belief system, like I said. that we can recognize when it's happening in the moment. So if Jack's up a tree or has just ran into the bathroom and locked the door or is kicked over a chair, that's probably a state of dysregulation. They're probably overwhelmed and they're definitely working from fight, flight or freeze, right? So you can assess the situation in the moment. So you're not going, this is a cognitive choice, he's being misbehaving or challenging on purpose, he's making the wrong choices. That's a very different response that we would then give. So we're able to recognize that trauma response. We can meet the child's emotional needs when they're displaying it. So we're able to calm the child down. We can get them into that state of rational brain again. We can meet their needs. So do they need breakfast? Do they need 5 minutes in a calm corner? Do they need to just feel connected for a moment? This is a human being. Do you know what I mean? They're a human being. So if they're feeling that overwhelmed that they've gone and ran down the field and are hiding behind a tree, then they need connection and they need someone to guide them and help them, because that is literally the only thing they know to do when they feel that difficult feeling. That's a problem. And it's our job as adults to teach them a different way. So we're looking at how do we meet that emotional need and understanding how we can help in the situation. And then it's also looking at our overarching approaches. So thinking about, okay, so is our behaviour management policy trauma informed? Because we can't re-trigger children in a trauma-informed school, or if you're a trauma-informed practitioner. You want to avoid re-triggering. So for example, if you're going to shout at a child, well, you're not understanding that you shouting is going to be perceived as more of a threat, and it's going to keep them in survival brain, and they're probably going to run away from you or get angry and aggressive. That's re-traumatizing or re-triggering a child. If you know that a child has been in a severely domestically violent situation and the house is constantly loud and chaotic, and you expect the child to go into a dinner hall, even though they've shown you 3 or 4 times that that's extremely overwhelming for them, and their brain is literally hijacking them to do crazy things like run away or throw themselves on the floor or get into a situation where they refuse to go in, then we have to look at that from a trauma-informed lens and go, okay, in order to not re-traumatize this child and make them go into a situation that feels so unsafe, we're going to create a small session for the child where they can have lunch with a few peers, and we're going to give them that sense of safety and security, because that is what they need. And at the end of the day, forcing them into a dinner hall is only going to mean that the rest of the afternoon is really, really difficult. Whereas if they can feel safe and secure, get the meal they need and the nutrients they need, have a calm conversation, just general conversation, not about behaviour, and just have some time to reflect before they're expected to learn, they're going to be in that rational thinking brain and can then learn, right? So again, we're not re-triggering, and we're also looking at our methods of supporting these children to be in a better position to learn, because unfortunately, outcomes and tests and being assessed and things like that is part of education at the moment. So we do have to look at how can we help them be in the best position to learn, and we want to teach our kids. We need them to be able to read, write and do maths and things like that. So we have to rethink our approaches to behaviour. If our blanket statement in our behaviour policy is, okay, when a child misbehaves they get 3 warnings, is that trauma informed? Because if you give a child a warning, you're effectively saying to that child, right, okay, I'm going to give you a warning. You need to now stop misbehaving because it's a choice that you've misbehaved. So now you need to stop making that choice. And then otherwise you'll get another warning and then you'll be sent out or you'll have a consequence. And again, usually the consequence is not linked to the situation. The consequence is something random, like you can't have golden time on Friday. If I'm a child who's been through trauma, you're going to see that through a completely different lens than a child who is secure and feels loved and really wants to be the best version of themselves and is really sad that they've upset someone. So of course they're going to behave. But even for that child, it's not necessarily healthy, right? But for a child who's been through trauma, so for me as a child, I would have been devastated. I would have been in shame, a state of shame, that I had got to the point where someone had given me a warning. I'd let them down. That must mean I'm not lovable. It must mean I'm not good enough. It must mean I'm bad. So therefore, I'm going to do everything I can to make this person like me again, because one of my things is I really don't like not being liked. I need people to like me because I feel like that's going to keep me safe, right? So, and mum and dad, there were times where they didn't show that they liked me, and that wasn't a safe situation to be in. There was definitely times where my dad didn't like me and I got emotionally abused. So now I'm constantly trying to make sure people like me. So if you gave me a warning, oh my God, everything inside of me would just be responding. And so I would 100% do what you wanted me to do. but that's not a healthy response to a rule. That it's not about sitting still and not shouting out, which maybe is the reason I got the warning. It's about like me not being a good enough human being and being in this real state of shame now because I've not been the version of myself you need, and I need to be that version for you to love me. That isn't what we want to do to our kids, right? So for me, that's my response. But for Jack, who's from a domestically violent home, whose parents are constantly hurting him and letting him down, and he doesn't trust adults, he doesn't think adults can keep him safe, and you go, I'm going to give you a warning. Jack's going to go, okay, well, you already think I'm bad. There's no way I'm going to get to not to get to warning 3. You already think I'm going to let you down. I'm a bad kid. I'm always in trouble. I'm definitely going to get to warning 3. But now you've got the power. You can take things away from me now. You're going to do things to me. Like, for example, you're going to give me that consequence. So I need to take that power back now because I can't let another adult have control over me. I do that too much, and it's put me in so many difficult situations. So then Jack is then going to perpetuate that difficult behaviour. He's going to find himself being silly, shouting out, fidgeting more, maybe get a bit frustrated and aggressive, maybe argue with you a little bit. And suddenly, before you know it, he's on number 3 and he's got that consequence. But the thought of having even just one warning makes the child so anxious, whether it's me or Jack, so anxious that you're pulling them into a trauma response. So it's not trauma informed. And actually, even if for the child who isn't responding from a trauma-informed response, it's still not healthy, really, to be kind of forced to behave because you're scared of a bad thing happening. Like, it's not really teaching the child much. So I think we just need to look at what is a trauma-informed response and how can we then be more trauma-informed in our approaches and in our culture of the school so that we can make sure that we're teaching our kids. Essentially, we want to be teaching our children healthy ways to manage their feelings and emotions. We want to be teaching our children ways that they can manage things when they're difficult and calm themselves down, regulate and go, okay, so I'm doing this, but actually I just need to just calm myself down, calm my body down. I need to take a minute and then I'll be more in control. Well, we have to teach them to do that. We have to teach them to do that in the moment. We also need to look at building really safe, healthy relationships with our kids, because a lot of children who've been through trauma don't trust adults, and adults are probably the person who's harming them. So building a healthy, trusting relationship is our first port of call before we can expect them to do anything else. They have to feel emotionally safe. And for me, that also extends to environments. If the environment they're in doesn't feel emotionally safe either, then they're probably also not going to be able to learn and access that part of the brain that we need them to flourish. And then the last thing is being aware of your own power. You can make such a difference to these children, and being trauma-informed allows you to be a different version of the adults they've met before, because the way you see them is different and the way you respond to them is different. But also looking at your own triggers. Like, we're working with children, but we've been through our own stuff. Do you know what I mean? So can you check yourself and go, oh, actually, I'm angry right now because this child's sworn at me, but I'm not angry because they're swearing because they're cross and they're frustrated and they don't know another way to show how angry they are. I'm angry, like it's put something in, I feel attacked, and now I'm in fight mode, and that's why I've raised my voice. Or it might be that you go, I'm really overwhelmed in this situation, and I've actually had to go and get help because I can see that I'm in flight mode. This child's making me feel unsafe. So then you're aware of your own triggers and your own trauma responses, or just your own fight, flight, freeze response. Again, we all do that when we don't feel secure. And then you can get sort of the support that you need to help you as well. So it's kind of looking at it as a whole. So I think my top tips for you, God knows how long this podcast episode is I think first and foremost, if you are a practitioner in school, you need to get some training so that you can understand more about trauma and understand more about how it affects the children and what you can actually do. Like, what can you say? How can you change those kind of behaviour policy points and things like that? Like, in your own classroom, or even just in your own interaction, there's so much more that you can do by avoiding saying certain things and supporting the children in different ways. If you're a leader, looking at a whole school approach is, for me, I really feel like it's the way forward. I don't think that you can just train up 1 or 2 members of staff. It has to be that every single person in school understands what trauma-informed practice is. They completely get that this is going to impact how children show up in school and even think and their perceptions, and they know exactly what they can do. So you've got to look for something that teaches them the theory, but also teaches them the how. So this is something that I do a lot in my therapeutic teaching course and in the book. It's all about the how. I have like a full chapter on the how in the book, like literally step by step, what you say, how you then support the child to regulate, how you then look at sort of a consequence without it being a punishment, because the how is what's so important. And that's maybe where we get it a bit wrong. That's maybe where it becomes a bit woolly, because we're scared to put a consequence in because we don't want to punish. But then what do we do instead? Like, if I can't give him a red card, what do I do? Like, so we've got to start to look at that and start to think about, no, there are things you can do, but maybe it's not a punishment. For example, like giving them a responsibility, pick up the chair, let's fix the display board, those sorts of things. So I think blanket training is so important, good quality training that's actually going to help people understand what they can do once they understand the science and the theory. Because just a random trauma-informed session where they teach you all about trauma and what it means to be trauma-informed and then give you a few basic things and that's it, is not going to help you. You want to create a full culture in school. You want to create an approach where everybody understands and really where the whole school feels emotionally safe. So first and foremost, train everyone. If you're a practitioner on your own, train yourself. And then you want to look at how do we help the children understand what's going on too. So again, like, we can do all of this training, but what about them? It really, really helped me when I started to learn and do like psychology, and then I went on and did I became a play therapist, so I did lots of stuff on development and trauma and stress responses and all of those sorts of things, and obviously then have built like now 2 businesses that support vulnerable children. But if I hadn't have done that, I would have had no awareness. And I see people, children and adults all the time that don't have that awareness, that go around and they're working from their stress and trauma responses, but they don't understand that they are. So they're blaming other people, they're feeling hijacked and cross and angry, and they don't have the strategies to calm themselves down. So it's really important to just take a step back and start to train the children to understand and to see what's going on so that they're aware of it. So we need to, and we look at this a lot in the therapeutic teaching approach, is what are the things that we're saying in the moment to the child to connect with them and calm that brain down, but then to also give them some insight. So I always say, name their feelings and link it to their behaviour. So for example, you might, instead of saying, right, why have you just kicked over the bin? Okay, you need to pick over the bin. Jack, can you pick the bin up please and come and sit down? It's English. Right, okay, Jack, you've got a warning. That is all based on behaviour, and it's all going to just keep the child in a state of stress, and it isn't responding to his emotional needs in the moment, right? So that isn't going to work. But what we can do is we can go, maybe we just say to the class, just give me 2 minutes, guys, to read what's on the board, please. Or we ask the TA to come and sit in and say, just come over here. Can you just make sure everyone's like able to, see what's on the board while I just do this? Or whatever works in the moment. And go over to Jack and say to Jack, or even across the room, whatever you feel comfortable with. But you might be saying to Jack then, you're feeling really overwhelmed this morning, you look super tired, and things are just getting a little bit overwhelming, and you don't want to do this English, and you don't want to come in and sit down because it's different. It feels different, and it wasn't what you were expecting. So you're telling him how he's feeling. Let's go and have a few minutes to calm down. Come on, let's go and have a drink, or Miss Jackson will take you out and you can go and have a little bit of time in the calm room. And then when you've had a bit of breakfast, you can come back and we can carry on. And that then is going to help him calm down and regulate. You've told him his feelings, you've linked it to his behaviour and said, so you don't want to come and do English. And then you've given him a chance to regulate. And then you can say, okay, when we go back in that room, I need you to pick up that chair that you dropped. And that's then the boundary. So we look at, in the therapeutic teaching approach, we look at like the name, the feeling, linking it to the behaviour. We look at self-regulation. We look at raising emotional intelligence in what we say. We then look at boundaries. And that is really important because that's a trauma-informed response. And our outcome is going to be better. Jack's going to feel more connected, and he's therefore going to be able to come back and make amends, but also gives him the chance to calm down because we're using the science, we're not working against it. So looking at our responses, and again, a whole school approach helps everybody to learn to do that. And then I think the last thing is to just be aware that we've all got this happening to us on a day-to-day basis. So if you see a member of staff who's overwhelmed in the staff room, give them a minute and just let them know that you're there, that you can hear them. And again, use that skill. Say, God, it sounds like you've had a really tricky weekend, and it sounds like you did everything you could to help the kids, but it felt a bit overwhelming, and so you're knackered now. So you're linking their feelings to their behaviour. You're not saying, oh yeah, I've had that happen too, and oh my God, it was really tricky for me, because then it becomes about you. So just look out for it. Now you've got a bit more awareness, and try and help support the people around you. But understand that trauma-informed practice is so important. I wish at school somebody had been bothered enough to understand that maybe some of my behaviours, and I was a very good girl, I listened, I did everything I was told to do, I was very much people pleaser, but that some of my behaviours maybe were linked to internal beliefs that weren't that healthy. Do you know what I mean? And I think maybe if someone helped me unpick what had happened, or taught me through maybe some of the things that had gone on and connected with me, instead of making me feel like I had to do everything on my own, maybe I would have felt a lot better and a lot more connected to adults, and I wouldn't have this belief that I have to people please and support everyone and do everything for everybody else and make sure they're okay, even if it's at my own emotional expense. So being trauma informed is definitely not a woolly approach, and there are definitely ways that you can do this that are going to help you to maintain boundaries within school. Children need boundaries desperately. Like, it's so important because it makes them feel emotionally safe to know that an adult will step in and to know that there are boundaries. But they also need to know what are the steps, and if you do the same steps every time, that's safe. That makes them feel like you can rely on you. So I think it's super important to think about trauma-informed practice maybe with a different lens. So I'm going to leave it there for this episode. I think we should definitely do a behaviour episode, so that will come soon, and we'll also do a therapeutic classroom episode. So look out for those. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a gorgeous day or whatever you're going to do next, and I will speak to you really soon. Bye.